VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We're going to talk about the 7-6 Vikings, one of the weirdest games of my tenure as a fan. I've been a fan since 1996, and 3-0 in Las Vegas when the ticket prices were $300 just to get in the door. Pretty wild. So I want to talk to you guys and gals about how this Vikings win changed everything, and we're going to operate under the pretense that the postseason is the goal. I think we all know that this brand of Vikings without Kirk Cousins, maybe even with Kirk Cousins, wasn't good enough to win a Super Bowl. We'll always maintain the hope that it's a weird year where they get hot, and they indeed do that. But this whole chat will be under the pretense that the goal is to get in the postseason and then see what happens. So Minnesota's win at Las Vegas indeed changed everything in that regard. First, we're going to start out with the math. So before this game, didn't matter if they won 3-0 or 54-0, the Vikings had about a coin flip's chance to get into the postseason. When they lost to the Bears on Monday Night Football, at the time, and even now to an extent, that was a brutal loss. It was at home against an NFC opponent, and when tiebreakers probably shake out here in a few weeks, you needed that win. It really didn't matter a whole lot to lose to the Broncos because that was, the win streak was bound to end. That was against an AFC opponent on the road. Shit happens. Losing at home to the Bears was a different animal. And now the Bears, they beat the Lions too, so evidently they've got a little oomph to them. But before the game kicked off, the Vikings were, depending on the playoff calculator that you used, at about 50 to 54% chance of reaching the postseason. It was up to them. If they went 3-2 or 4-1 the rest of the way, then they're going to make the postseason. Well, now Sunday worked out wonderfully for all of the other games the Vikings wanted to play out in a certain way, plus the Vikings 3-0 win. The playoff math, according to ESPN's FPI, is now at 64%. And that will climb even more if the Packers somehow lose tonight to the Giants, probably closer to 70. But it could have been as bad. Let's say the Rams ended up beating the Ravens or the Seahawks shocked the 49ers. It could have been as bad with a Vikings loss to the Raiders as about 29% probability per all of the calculators in reaching the postseason. So you had a swing, potentially a bad Sunday, resulted in 29-30%. But here we are at about 64%. So, broken record here. If your goal as the fan was for these Vikings to get in the playoffs, and, there's some of you who want to just tank and, we don't care about getting to the postseason and losing. We want a draft pick that's in the top 10. If your goal was to get into the postseason, then everything changed with the win over the Raiders. So the teams that lost were the Los Angeles Rams, a heartbreaker in overtime. Tylan Wallace at the punt return, that was sweet. That really helped the Vikings because recently the Rams had gotten frisky at 6-6, heading into yesterday, the same record as the Vikings. But now losing to the Ravens puts them at 6-7 on the outside looking in. Seattle is continuing its plunge. They lost to the 49ers, no surprise there. They're now in the 9th seed. It felt like just yesterday they were in the, 5th or 6th seed? 6th seed? Detroit. Who knows what their deal is. There's this weird thing about the Lions where because they haven't been very good in 30 years, the media desperately wants them to be a Super Bowl contender, and they're just not. They're a good football team, but they're not like the 49ers or Cowboys or Ravens or Chiefs. They're a good football team that might get good next year or something. But no, every week in the past month they exposed themselves as a pretender, and some of the media is just like, we love Dan Campbell. We're not out on them just yet. They're not very good. They're pretty good, but they're not great. And then Atlanta, Tampa Bay, that one worked out favorably for the Vikings because Tampa Bay owns that precious tiebreaker from the Week 1 win. It would be much better for the Vikings' sake if they just win that lousy NFC South. And then the other two teams trying to get in, the Falcons and Saints, the Vikings already have the tiebreaker. So it was tailor-made. It was a script for the Vikings, just as bad as last week was when the Vikings didn't play. Everything got better in terms of other matchups. So a loss at the Raiders would have made this Saturday, against the Bengals absolute desperation. Yesterday's Heading into it, I was asked on a couple shows, is this a must-win game for the Vikings? And I was like, mathematically, no, because if they lose to the Raiders, in theory, they can go on one of their little win streaks and win the next 4, maybe even 3, go 3-1 and get in. But had the Vikings lost 3-0 to the Raiders, then going into Jake Browning's Paycor Stadium and the Bengals, that would have been basically a playoff game. You either you lose to the Raiders and you lose the Bengals, then you're probably cooked. You don't have to worry about that now, because based on a real timely decision by Kevin O'Connell to go to Nick Mullins, it was kind of a season-saving decision, even though you only won 3-0. So what we learned about the quarterback, that also everything changed because Josh Dobbs, the mania, Dobbs mania, the Pastronaut, all of that fun finally wore off, and I don't think we'll see Dobbs again unless it's an emergency situation. And I've come to realize, as much as we were high on him, I was high on him, and I still really wouldn't mind if they bring him back to be the bridge quarterback next year if they don't want to pay Cousins $40 million per year to the next guy, to the QB1, whether that's Bo Nix or Jaden Daniels, which is who this guy will want. I don't think Dobbs is going to be the quarterback again. Kevin O'Connell said that we haven't decided yet, but it would be almost criminal to go back to Dobbs. And this is what happens. I told my wife this yesterday, like a lifelong football lesson, that there are certain guys, evidently like Josh Dobbs, who will absolutely take the world by the throat for a game or two as a backup quarterback, just a chaos merchant. Somehow Dobbs got worse as he got to understand the playbook more, which is mind-boggling. But we fell victim to that hype trap that said, this Josh Dobbs is just an unearthed gem. Nope, he is a typical QB2 who had a really good game and a half, 2 games, and then came back to earth, and we all figured out why he is not some team's bona fide QB1. He's just not that dynamic. He's not a great passer. When a play breaks down, he's pretty charming when he's on the move, but other than that, he is what you really totally nominate as a QB2, that bring him in to help save a certain game and great, and then wait for your other guy to get back. Well, in this case, the other guy is going to be Nick Mullins. I firmly believe it'd be really weird if Mullins wasn't the quarterback against the Bengals. I will keep going back to this on Mullins, is he was the QB2 to start the season. So he should have been pissed last week when he didn't get the job after the quarterback debate, because it was his job in September. It was his job in early October. But I think the win, over the Raiders changed everything, because now we kind of know it's going to be the Nick Mullins program the rest of the way. It was vividly evident that as soon as he got in there, he is a better flinger of the football, probably, especially for this offense. And I tweeted yesterday, and I'll maintain this for the rest of the season. Having Nick Mullins out there is like having 70% of Kirk Cousins all of the time. That's what he is. There's going to be a lot of shit probably in the next 4 games where you're like, oh, that's why Mullins is a QB2. But the hope is that he's not going to, have 4 interceptions like Dobbs did against the Bears. But Mullins, he can be that guy. He's wily. He can sling it. He's a mini gunslinger. He's 70% of Kirk Cousins at all times. And he showed yesterday that he had the gumption, the nerve, and the audacity to drive the team down the field for a single field goal, which was all that was needed. And let's talk about one of Kevin O'Connell's quotes yesterday in the locker room. He said this is a championship caliber defense. And you beat the Raiders and Aiden O'Connell, so let's slow down a little bit. But on the whole, it's certainly a defense that can get you deep in the postseason. Now, the lifelong problem of the Vikings is as soon as the defense gets really good, then your quarterback's hurt. Or through 2020, 2021, and some of 2022, you had Kirk Cousins playing at a very high level, but the defense sucked. Well, here we are again with the inverse. We don't have Kirk Cousins, and we have a wonderful defense. It just never gets everything at the same page. The closest thing was 2018 when the Vikings defense was still really good, but Kirk didn't quite have it to even get the team to the postseason. But the takeaway here is if Nick Mullins goes on a little run like, Dobbs did, but it's longer, or God forbid, Joe Flacco in 2012. If Mullins can do 70% of that, then yeah, this team can win a playoff game, assuming they get there. It's just going to come down to how well Mullins protects the ball and how gross his warts are when those start to be revealed. But indeed, I agree that the defense, even if they're playing shitty teams, has really shown up, and it's quite marvelous to see. And I hope that we're not just spending the last month on Brian Flores' watch, and then we switch to the next guy. It feels like that should happen based on how fast he's turned this defense around. But remember that Kevin O'Connell thinks it's a championship caliber defense, and if he believes that, he is going to play the quarterback who he believes can feed wide receivers and tight ends and then let the defense do the rest. And I'm pretty damn sure that's going to be Nick Mullins. Now we're in a wait and see with injuries. It was almost comical that Justin Jefferson got hurt, Alexander Madison got hurt, Brian O'Neill too. I think Reisner got hurt but came back in, if I'm not mistaken. That's going to dominate the rest of the week. I'm going to surmise, because they proceeded so gingerly with Jefferson, what was it? Ended up being 3 weeks after he got off. Technically, he was activated to come off IR. They were like, we're gonna take this thing week by week and make sure he's 100% ready. I'm gonna guess they do the same thing again, and I don't even know what the injury is. They just keep saying chest injury, but I will be cynical enough to believe that Jefferson probably won't play against the Bengals, just my personal theory. And then it's the Addison show, and then Osborne, who just drops things like bad habits. That was depressing. Yeah, I think Jalen Naylor even got in there because Osborne got benched for a little bit because of all the drops. But what we didn't know last week is now we have this plethora of offensive injuries. Brian O'Neill one is brutal. When we're just going to wait and see. This whole season has been about overcoming injuries, and the Vikings have, in fact, done that quite well. And that's where we're at for figuring out the prognosis against the Bengals. The Bengals are favored by 4, an early favorite to defeat the Vikings, and they're hot all of a sudden, go figure. But if your single objective was to see Kevin O'Connell get to a postseason for the second time and maybe win a game this time around, the win at the Raiders put that in firm view and in full focus. A loss would have struck a very different tone on this show, saying, look, guys, they only have a 30 to 35% chance of reaching the postseason. They got to beat the Bengals, maybe hope that they win after that against the Lions. But everything's different. Winning at the Raiders really put the Vikings in a driver's seat to at least reach the postseason. Hopefully the 6th seed, the 5 is probably out of question. All right, tomorrow we'll be back to talk with Dustin Klug, that Vikings fan is what he goes by. We're going to chat with him about this win, start to look ahead to the Bengals. And I am actually going to the Bengals game. My buddy Yannick Eckhart, who's been on this show a couple times from Germany, he'll be here for 6 weeks at my place, hanging out for the Christmas season. And one of the first things we're going to do is take a long-ass road trip to Cincinnati. I got tickets right when Burrow was out, and it felt like their season was going nowhere. Ticket prices came down. We got some really sweet seats close to the field, and I got them at the perfect time because now, after they've won the last 2 games, those prices have gone back up. So what a lucky guy. All right, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Skol, baby.